You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is May 20th, 2024, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we're bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. Today we have a special guest. We have probably our last interview before the convention with one of the presidential contenders for the Libertarian Party, and that is Dr. Charles Ballay. So we're excited to have him here, and we're certainly going to talk with him throughout the episode and find out about his positions. But before we get into any of that, let me introduce you to the rest of the panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our upper left-hand corner, we have our guest, Dr. Charles Ballay, and my name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So we always start out with a Liberty quote, and I try to find something that sort of matches the flavor of the show, and because, you know, Dr. Ballay has just sort of jumped on the scene and he is right in the thick of it. So I thought this was kind of an appropriate quote, and it's from past president, our 35th president, John F. Kennedy. And he said, one person can make a difference and everyone should try. So I thought that was a heck of a quote. And especially since it really talks, it gets us down to the individual level. And I think that's yeah, and I think it's great too that, you know, I love the fact that you're jumping up and trying to do something here too. So that's
right.
The main reason why I picked it. Do you guys have any thoughts on this?
Well, I think the quote says it all. I mean, you start with the individual, and then you build to the family, and then the family you build to the community, and the community build, you know, to the state and so on, and that kind of stuff. I think it says it all. I mean, I think we as individuals, you know, many times I can see where this quote is really applicable in 2024, because many times we think, you know, our vote don't matter. Some of us become complacent and don't vote, but one vote can make a difference, and it does at times.
That's right.
So I think the quote is very applicable.
Yeah, and for me, just a reminder that this also means that you can make a difference by improving your life and supporting yourself and your family and not being a burden on the rest of us.
Indeed.
And, so in that sense, it's not just, what can I do to improve government or, you know, give it more power or give it less power or whatever, but nothing to do with that. But it can be in other ways that we can make a difference.
Indeed.
That's right.
Any other thoughts from you, Charles, on this one? Or
I think that's a fantastic quote, and that's actually why I jumped into this race. I do think every single person can make a difference, and every person that is out there has good qualities. You just have to figure out what it is those qualities are, and we need to try to use those to help other people.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, and I think it's great, too, that we can see that if we go back far enough, we can find some wise quotes from Democrats as well to inspire them. So anyway, we're going to get into jump into the meat of the show here now. We're going to talk with Charles about his background, a little bit about why he got into this, and then we'll talk about some of his positions on some of the big topics. And finally, we'll touch on our knucklehead noise patrol at the end with something kind of outrageous that somebody said. But let's jump into the interview. So, Charles, I brought up your campaign page here, and
right.
I mean, it's for real. I didn't know who you were until a few months ago, and you're just right in the thick of it. And I think it's great. I mean, the idea that you came in, and before we knew it, you had won the primary in California. now the way it's organized in the Libertarian Convention is they actually vote at the convention to figure out who's going to be the person. But still, it's a heck of a thing to just jump in there and say, hey, I just won the primary for California. So that's pretty awesome.
That was serendipitous, mind you. It really was. So once again, thank you guys for having me on. I'd love to tell you all about myself. I got into this race, honestly. I think one person can make a difference. I've got into this race, honestly, because for years acting as a physician, I've just continued to see persons disenchanted with how this country is being run. And I think some persons who are well off, but more often persons who are not well off, are feeling disenfranchised, and they just feel like they're just not getting a fair shake. And then it doesn't help that we have social media where there's such vehement rhetoric, and you have sidedness. Both parties have sort of pitted one side against the other, and adults aren't acting like adults anymore. And I said, I can prove that maybe one person can make a difference, and perhaps I can do even better. I can actually show people that if you have the wherewithal and the gumption, you can run for office, and normal people can actually try to get ahead and make a difference in this world. And we don't have to be, spewing rhetoric that I don't think that's very healthy for people. We're now living in a society where we have to be at some political odds, as opposed to meeting in the middle and saying, listen, this is what I believe and this is what you believe, but how can we kind of help each other out? And that's how we kind of got into this. And we were very fortunate, because one day I decided I would just figure out how all this worked. And I called the Secretary of State in California, and they explained it at the office. And I'm like, well, this sounds pretty right on. So filled out the paperwork, sent it in, and lo and behold, there you go, right?
Well, that's awesome. One of the things for a lot of people is they kind of wonder, how do I, if I want to get involved, how do I do it? And I mean, it sounds like you just sort of did it. Was there a lot of resources involved in order to do that? I mean, were you just able to say, hey, nobody else is running in California on that ticket?
Well, no, I mean, I did, make inquiry as to how one would go about this, and then, write the party and try to do homework. But I think I have my background as a physician, where you're sort of following, sets of guidelines every single day, actually kind of helped out in this situation, because I'm used to being so much a sort of a rule follower, if you want to call it that, because there's protocol that you have to follow to, from point A to point B and, C and so on. And so, I figured, all right, well, in order to get on the ballot, there's going to be a set of rules that one has to kind of adhere to. So what are these rules, and how do I go about trying to, meet the requirements? And that's kind of how it came about. But it truly was serendipitous. I think I found out within like a 48-hour window, like, oh, wow, I better FedEx this in today.
Charles, a little while ago, you spoke about meeting in the middle and figuring out how we can help each other out. Okay,
that's right.
So I wonder that raises a question in my mind. I mean, libertarians or the liberty-minded, we have some very strong views about the role of government in our lives, or right. At least we have some understanding of what the limits should be. So the question then, if you were to be elected, how would you deal with the fact that to get things done, you nearly always have to compromise some of your principles? How would you deal with that?
Well, no, I think you do have to compromise your principles. But that's every day in life. There's very little that we do as humans where we don't have to say, I don't agree with it, but I'm going to comply. And hence we're libertarians, and we live in some cases, you guys more than me, a non-libertarian society. I mean, but I think you have to figure out, how can I promote the ideals at which I believe in? What is the best bang that I can get for my buck? You may not get all of it, sure, but you can sure as heck try to point in a direction. I mean, it's not singularly right or left. I mean, it is there are shades of gray in between. And yes, I would side with, free market and less government and no taxation. But you also have to realize that there are persons that live in this great country that have completely opposite views, and we have to all get along. And it's about time that adults begin to. I relish the days when my father would sit down and say, he's an attorney, and I'll get back to this in a second, because it does mean every vote counts, and I'll explain. I relish the days when two attorneys that are complete opposites can sit down over a meal with regards to their prospective clients and come up with a solution and shake hands and agree to disagree, but at the same time they remain friends, after, and they can have completely polar opposite views. And I think that's what this country needs right now. I mean, you turn on any news station right now, and I know it's the job of the media to sell tickets, but it's pathetic to see the rhetoric. I mean, you just had some fight in Congress with I want to say it's green, and I mean, it's just this is childish, and it's not good for it. No one needs to see this. I mean, it truly is something that's pathetic, and we need to raise the bar and begin to act like adults. And because how can we ask our children and our youth or anyone around us to act similarly if we can't lead by example?
Indeed. So which I mean, I want to further that point a little bit. So yes. I mean, the fight here, the disgraceful fight that occurred in Congress was between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine Crockett is from Texas. But the point is, though, now sometimes, I mean, many of us, at least those of us, the liberty-minded among us, we feel like we are seeing the Titanic out there. It's sailing forth into the dark of the night. And there's this big iceberg out there. And like we are just sailing towards the iceberg, and no one is there to steer the ship away. And which raises the question, what do you think you can do? There we get to the one person making a difference. What do you think you can do to steer the Titanic away from that iceberg?
You lead by example. I do this every single day in surgery. You know, people will come in and complain. I'll give you for example, and then I'll come back to this. People complain our operative times, our turnover times are too long. It's taking too long to get patients in the room. You get in there. If it takes a mop to go clean the floor, or I have to make a bed, I do it because we speed things along. I prove to people that I am not above anyone. I mean, I can do the job that the most meager individual can do, the janitor can do, and I can still do that same job and lead by example. I mean, I think there's no better means to show this country that you are serious about it than to act accordingly. I mean, I think I'm not saying that the president should go out, begin to be a street sweeper, but if you're going to purport that people should get together, you have to be that person that is willing to go out and shake hands and be able to meet people, sometimes in the middle. But if you're going to do so and you're going to act that would not be necessarily in accordance with libertarian values, you damn well owe it to your party and to your constituents to say, this is why I'm choosing this path. Because in the end, these actions will justify in means. And by the way, sometimes there's you have to make concessions. And while it does hurt, you have to see what the big picture is. And I think the big picture is humanity, is getting along. I don't like large government, but you can't have it all at once. I mean, that would be tyranny. It sometimes irks me, sometimes even viscerally, to hear a person say, like, I'm going to just stop this. And then you begin to think more like a tyrannical government. And that's not what libertarians believe in. I mean, we believe in liberty and personal autonomy and less government and less taxation, and that we should be able to make our own mistakes in life. And I would agree with all of those principles. But to answer you directly, I think one has to lead by example. I mean, I think you have to show people that you can get along, that if someone begins to disparage you, you can just turn it and say, okay, these are just words, but guess what? I'm still going to like you. We're still going to get along. And I'm not going to produce any rhetoric or sort of slander you, behind your back on the news or what have you. I mean, you shake hands and smile and move on. And let's go to the next subject, because it's not about an individual. It's about the public. I mean, that's why we're running for office.
Well, Charles, one of the things that we often see in the compromise that happened, and I think this is what's so troubling for so many of us, is that, like, we just saw the Republicans were grousing about FISA for several years, and then when there was finally a vote on it, they didn't really give a good explanation. They just turned around and they literally rubber stamped it and sent it through. And I guess the issue is, I think for compromise, it's sort of like we have to see that North Star of what it is we're trying to get to, but then maybe a good explanation why we're taking this deal. Is that kind of how you're seeing it, or is there another way?
I would imagine it varies by position too. I mean, some people are going to have far more authority to sort of guide the Titanic, right? I think you have to set your end goals. You have to explain where you are. And then you have to be consistent about this, right? So if you're given the opportunity to act in this manner, that's how you need to act. right? I don't think you should waver, and I don't believe in a lot of these polls. They can mislead individuals and politicians. You have to stand with conviction, and sometimes that will hurt. But what I mean that you have to get along is, I think the rhetoric needs to go away. It needs to be strict. It's more of a business. You have to look at the end game is take care of your constituents and your people. Right now, you basically have a government that is spending a hand over fist. You have social services that are out of control. You have people coming into this country for these social services in many cases. You have a healthcare system that's fallen apart. Education system's not so good. I mean, you don't see many things in the United States, despite it being the wealthiest country and having such talent. It's just not producing what it could right now. And so the end game of a leader, I think, is to guide this country and to try to make it better for everyone, not just the top few. And furthermore, you shouldn't take from the top few and just sort of bolster the bottom few. And there's a reason why some of the top persons have gotten to the top. I mean, so you have to make it fair. It has to be equitable. Justice should be blind.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that's not the case nowadays.
Yeah.
One of the things I definitely wanted to get into with you a little bit, because it seems like we're all just sort of getting to know who you are now. And so I guess, what was it that sort of rang your liberty bell? What sort of woke you up to a lot of these ideas on liberty? And who was your biggest influence, I guess, or what was your biggest influence?
My biggest influence is my patients. Finally, enough is enough. It was sometime last year, and I don't know exactly the date. I mean, I remember having dinner with somebody and bitching and complaining about the current situation, and then realizing that we're going to have the same two persons on the ballot that we had a few years ago, and people upset. But I think it was just a culmination of just a lot of news cycles. Seeing just the infighting in the parties and the fighting between the various political parties. It just finally said, you know what, enough's enough. I'm gonna see how far a man that is small and doesn't have a whole lot of much can get. I mean, and so I said, I've spent my entire life not my entire life, but much of my life learning, working, just as you all have. I mean, you don't become an engineer, you don't become a pilot by just sort of jumping into the pilot seat or, what have you. But you said, let's see where this will take us. And I have a very good foundation. I have a lovely wife, family that cares, so I'm very fortunate in those aspects. I have a wife second to none when it comes to organizational type stuff. And so I said, let's jump into this and see where this goes. And, this, I think when we first got into it, who are you and why are you here kind of thing was sort of the attitude. But as we persisted, that's the thing you have to have in this business, I would imagine. Just like anything, if you really want it, you have to really want it. So we had showed persistence and diligence, and we've been building upon success, over the past few months, and finally we've made it to the convention at this point. So what drew me into this, though, was just disdain for our current state of affairs in the United States of America. I mean, I think this country can be better. I want it to be better. I mean, we all know it can be better. It's just a matter of right leadership in order to guide this country in the right direction.
Is there any sort of North Star you have on your philosophy of liberty? Like, is there a certain, I guess, person or I guess work that might have really inspired you?
No, I mean, I can't say, and I'm not going to say, to make it sound cliche. Oh, this was, I listened to, to the Mises people, or I listened to Ron Paul. No, it's just, I was brought up in a family that requires hard work. You don't ask for handouts. If you do, I mean, it's sort of, it's not that it's a bad thing for anyone to need that. It's just, I came from a family where you just work hard and if you feel like you're getting the shit into the stick, pardon those, that word for the public access, you just need to work harder. You just need to work harder. I mean, that's the way we were brought up. I mean, and so when I was a child, I was a migrant farm worker. I worked at Popeye's Fried Chicken. I worked on oyster boat. I worked for a fish house throughout high school, delivery trucks, packing, 18-wheelers with oyster sacks. I mean, I had every job. My dad made me work my ass off to know that I could always outwork other individuals. And it's come to fruition because I know I can, for the most part, outwork many people. I mean, not everyone, obviously. There are people that could work harder than myself. But I know that if push comes to shove, I can work pretty doggone hard. And that has afforded me probably a different outlook than some. We're like, oh, wow, I'm kind of out of luck right now. No, I'm not out of luck. I just need to work harder, And so I think I've had that in my ballywick, so to speak, and it's helped.
Yeah, I've been a libertarian for over 25 years, and I was perusing your website and looking through a lot of the principles, and all the ones that I read were things that I would agree with, and that I've always considered to be foundational libertarian ideas. And so it seems like you've got a lot of knowledge about libertarian principles that you probably acquired, unless you acquired them all over the last year. I think I'm wondering how you came up with all these things if you've only just rung the Liberty bell a year ago or so, or 2 years ago.
Most of this I was brought up. I was brought up this way. I mean, I went to Catholic schools here because the educational system in New Orleans, for the most part, is abhorrent. We don't have counties; we have parishes. So some of the neighboring parishes, counties have decent school systems. But my parents scrimped and saved, put me through school with a Catholic education, and ultimately trained by the Jesuits. And the Jesuits really took they were not you had to work. I mean, it wasn't a cakewalk when you at school, and they really taught you a lot to be a man for others. I mean, that was the mantra. So my background, my experiences, the gifts that have been afforded me in education, world experiences. I mean, I went to school here. I went to art school in England for a little while. I was a bit disenchanted with just college. I finished college here. I went to med school here. So I've kind of had a lot of experiences that I'm extremely fortunate. But most of those experiences weren't given to me like somehow somebody handed it out. It was more along the lines like, all right, so in order to get to art school, I went and became a worker putting up scaffolding when they were building the oil platforms down in Morgan City. So I'd be 100 feet, 200 feet off steel deck, hammering in scaffolding, climbing off the roof, without a safety belt, because I needed to make the money to go to England. That's how I did it. I mean, it wasn't going to be given to me, so that's how I did it. So I learned, through hard work.
One of the biggest things that's impacted a lot of people and have been waking up people toward a lot of liberty issues over the last couple of years is, one, how the government reacted to COVID, and also just recently the election of Javier Milei in Argentina.
Right.
James, could you bring that visual up real quick just so people could see what we're talking about? So Javier Milei, the Argentine president, he was full-on libertarian, the first libertarian, so kind of almost a North Star for a lot of libertarians.
That's right.
I think you were running. But how did these big events impact you and your views on liberty?
I can't really say it changed anything other than I think it added some degree of credence to kind of like what one believes, and I'm really, really happy that this is all working for him because now once again you could lead through example. People begin but prior to his being elected into office, many of these philosophies were sort of looked upon like it could never work, and he's proven everyone wrong. And so now people have to second guess or their decisions of when they said, hey, wait, this would never work. No, this is working. I mean, look at what's happened to the economy. Look at what's happening now to the inflationary rates down there. I mean, so his measures, the austerity measures, have worked, and consequent to that, now it perhaps it's going to come vogue, for politicians to take a more conservative stance across the world. I mean, we were all being pushed towards socialism, hand over fist. And in many cases where you guys are, you still are being pushed towards socialism.
Oh, God, please. Don't remind us, Charles, please.
Well, but look how that's failed. And wonder. I mean, I remember growing up and seeing, Venezuela as this crown jewel of South America, and look where they are now, consequence of poor decisions. And in Argentina, maybe just this beacon of this North Star that everyone can look to and say, there is a means to get out of these terrible measures that have kind of taken us into places we don't want to go.
Well, being a doctor too, as far as COVID goes, how did that impact you as well? All these lockdowns, telling people what they could and couldn't do medically during that.
So I didn't like it, but I had to comply because I'm not in government, and I sure as heck wasn't a politician at the time. I was either too brave or too dumb to know any better, because when it first came around, I would just slap on a mask, an N95 or a gas mask. We ultimately started wearing gas mask or the big respirators, and just go operate because there wasn't really many other people. My job as an airway, I'm an ENT, otolaryngology guy. So I would put trachs in people, right? And and at the time there was really no guidance because no one had guidance to give because of a lack of information. So I called myself too dumb to realize that what I was doing was potentially dangerous. But we did it. That was our job, and I was fortunate to have a job at the time. I sure as heck didn't like being locked up because, at the end of the day, we'd come home, I'd get completely naked at the front door. Not that you want to know that. I throw all of my belongings. I throw all of my belongings into the washing machine, which is close to the front door, turn it on, go, get into the shower, scrub off. And then basically my wife and I would figure out what to do in our home because there really wasn't much else to do. Fortunately, we're in New Orleans, right? So there's culture, and some of the restaurants would have if you signed up that you could drive by and someone with a mask would run out and give you a box of wine and cheese, and everyone would have a Zoom call, and you would basically have wine and cheese. You're looking at 200 people on Zoom, so there were kind of funny things that you could do like that, but it was actually pretty lonely during that time, and it wasn't fun. And our culture, which is in New Orleans, very people-minded, sit around the table and eat and have crawfish together, etc., was for the most part destroyed. I mean, we didn't have Mardi Gras. I mean, it's just a lot of horrible things that occurred consequent to these lockdowns, and it was tough for everybody. I mean, I was lucky because I had a job. People still get sick regardless of COVID being around or not. So I still had something to do and a place to go and a purpose in life at that time. And many people didn't have it, and that caused a lot of problems. A lot of people are still, and they will be suffering for quite some time as a consequence of that.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible. I was wondering too, how is the campaign going? Just to switch gears a little bit, is because the convention's coming up right away. What do you think your chances are? I guess I
think it's pretty good. I mean, I think we have a good team. It's been a learning experience, that's for sure. I mean, I think we've put a lot of effort into it. I have to give kudos to my wife, who sort of is the brainchild behind a lot of this. She is really kind of a planner. But we have a number of people that work for us across the country and volunteer, et cetera. And so, I think we have a decent shot. I think it's probably wide open right now, considering all of the misdirections I've heard from various social media places and just listening to rhetoric, et cetera. I mean, I have no clue who would be a top contender right now. As far as, I don't think anyone has it locked up right now,
Well, on that, I guess, edge of your seat thing, let me tell our public access audience that if you want to see the rest of the show and hear about Charles Ballay's positions on all the issues, you're going to have to catch it all online, but you can go there and find a whole lot of other shows and interviews too, so go check that out. So back to the show. Charles, yes, I guess, what are some of the things you've learned from this whole campaign experience too, as well? Because I mean, for somebody who just literally jumped in, I mean, there's a lot of people I know in the Libertarian Party who might have been trying to do this for a while, and you just sort of jumped in and taken the bull by the horns. So it must be like just a learning curve, must be like vertical.
It was, but again, I have a wonderful wife and wonderful team and wonderful family, and so I'm very blessed in that regard. I don't really like the word no. I mean, I think if you want something, you have to work hard enough to get it. I mean, that's just the way I've been taught. And look, this does not mean we're going to win. I mean, I sure hope we do, because I think we can truly make a difference. I just, this has been a learning experience on so many levels. I mean, you learn about, when persons speak about how little, or belittled, I should say, the Libertarian Party is compared to other larger parties. I would agree with them now. You look at media access, it's not available. You look at financial type issues, it's not available. You see a lot of steep climbs. You could have been in this party for 30 years, and it's still a tremendous uphill battle to fight in order to achieve, some degree of notoriety, as opposed to some of the other parties that you can just sign up for, and suddenly you automatically achieve notoriety in some of these other parties that have been around for a longer period of time. I don't think that's fair. I would relish the day when you see third parties, many third parties. And I'm not just simply saying libertarian. I mean, I want this party to do exceedingly well. But, God bless everyone who's running in the third party system. Cornel West, you look at Jill, Stein, you look at, just the innumerable candidates that are completely unknown to the United States that are getting their name out there and trying to do something and trying to better this nation. And those persons, kudos to them all. Where I may not agree with their philosophy, but I sure as heck can agree with the fact that I like the fact that they're trying to participate in the electoral process.
Well, one other
thing about Cornel West and Jill Stein, if they're putting issues on the table that we should discuss, I would agree with you, because both of them I have total disagreements with. I think
absolutely, I would too. But kudos to them for trying to run for office, at least for standing up, so we're not just left with a two-choice system.
Well, that this does bring up one issue too, that I know there's been a lot of libertarians that have been kind of upset about the fact that we kind of have given a platform to Cornel West and Jill Stein, and now Donald Trump at the convention, right. I guess will be there. Right. But I've also heard the flip side of that, where, hey, maybe this is actually helping other people to see who we are as well. And that does bring up a question. You're really new to the party, or new to this whole process, I guess. And right. What have you seen that you think, I guess it's advice for the Libertarian Party on how they could do a better job, I guess, going forward in elections?
So I think this party, I think the problem with this party right now is it's fractured. A family that eats together and, goes to the movies together and fishes together, et cetera, stays together. And there's a heck lot more power in a unified system, as opposed to having, differences of opinion. I think if this party stayed unified, it would do far better than where it is. And also it needs organization. It needs the fact of running for if you want to run for candidacy, perhaps on the presidential level, that's a different system. But if you want to run for a local candidate, this should be just like a slap bang. Okay, this is what you need to do for door knockers. This is what you need to do for literature. Should you choose to want to use this, right? But anybody who's willing to do this and can come up with enough finances to try to help support some of this, it should be an easier effort than trying to recreate the wheel every time. And perhaps some of these resources are out there, and I'm just, too stubborn to, dig for them. I just find it easier sometimes just to read and look online and figure out how to do things, as opposed to, trying to call people, because it sometimes just takes extra time or double the amount of time. And, you ultimately be doing the same thing. But, I think this party needs to unify. I really do. And I would pray that this actually happens over years. I know this party's been in business for 50 years, as opposed to two other parties that have each been for 150 years. So there's a big disparity. But it seems like consequent to this sort of this non-unity, other parties are able to get out in front with regards to messaging a little bit better than we are. And I think our messaging, if we can control the messaging, it's better, because most people that I speak to, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, entirely believe much of what we have to say. Not all of what we have to say, but much of what we have to say. Everybody inherently has some degree of libertarianism in them if you're an American and you want to be free. So it's just a matter of how do you frame this conversation. And I know that sounds cliche, but listen, I'm that guy that in Louisiana, there's some great libertarians, but there's not a whole lot of them out here. So when everybody asks me, what are you running for, and how, what party is this? I have to explain. They're like, that sounds actually, right. And then they scratch their head and say, I may change my party affiliation, to which I'll say, we'll see about that. But hopefully we can make some headway. I think most people these days are also scared to do things for another party out of fear of some sort of retribution from some of the other two parties should they get into power,
Yes.
Unfortunately, It does seem like there's an awful lot of bullying, especially against the third parties just getting on the ballot. But that's a whole nother issue. But I did want to start jumping into some of the topics. So one of the biggest things, and I kind of saw that in fact, let's bring up your campaign ad first before we jump into the topic. So James, that's KOL3. Can you bring that one up?
Fox News alert millions of American families.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for CBN News.
America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, is also the country of a $34 trillion debt and rising.
In a nation where citizens are limited to choosing between two parties that seem to do more to erode their rights than protect them, making America feel increasingly unsafe.
It's time for a change, a time for fiscal responsibility and individual liberty to take the forefront.
Hello, fellow Americans. My name is Dr. Charlie Ballay, and I'm running for president in 2024 as a libertarian. Today, I'd like to speak to you about breaking the cycle of a two-party system. It's time we end the duopoly and stop partisan politics. It's time we end a two-party system that's breaking this country. Together we can make change. Please join me in this endeavor.
Vote Charles Ballay, a libertarian candidate for president who stands for fiscal responsibility, individual liberties, and a smaller, more efficient government. It's time to break away from the status quo. Vote for Charles Ballay, and let's bring pragmatic solutions and true freedom back to America.
So that was a pretty good ad, and the one reason I wanted to kick off with that here is because the first thing that's staring us, especially as libertarians, in the face is this $35 trillion iceberg.
That's right.
We're headed toward. And
should.
Jane, maybe you could bring up the visual here, our invisible hand of numbers here, and
it's very frightening.
Well, yeah, and this is our U.S. debt clock, and here it's showing $35 trillion, and that breaks down to literally over $100,000 per citizen, which just floors a lot of people when they first hear it. And if you're really only thinking about the people who pay taxes, that's like near $270,000, and it's just growing at incredible rates. And here's a few other visuals too. This is our debt to GDP, and it really shows this spike here is World War II. So that should give you a sense. Back in 1900. World War I, and then we, had the Great Depression brought another spike there as well. But boy, I tell you, World War II brought us up to 100% ratio of debt to GDP, and we managed to sort of outpace that for a while. We didn't really pay it off; we just outpaced it by growing, and that's what this is going down here. But then we had the housing bust, and then boom, COVID here. That's that sharp spike there,
right.
And this is the Congressional Budget Office, and they're saying, hey, we don't change our ways. Look at this trajectory. I mean, it's headed off into scary land. And here's the slope of the growth of the debt. And it's, it's not even quite up to date yet. It's missing a year there. It's
unfathomable.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess my question is, what would I guess your big is this? This seems like this is your biggest focus, but what would you do, I guess, to try?
I think it should be the main focus of the United States, because without finances, we can't act like we have for this many years. I mean, look at how all this came about. I mean, post World War II we taxed galore post World War II. The taxes ultimately, fortunately, were lowered over time. Right. And I'm not for high taxes, but then you go away from a gold standard. I mean, I don't mean to rehash this. You guys know all this whole history where the gold standard's been abandoned. And then we begin to print money, hand over fist. And we begin to get into an arms race around the time of Ronald Reagan. And consequent to that, our debt GDP ratio, it has just taken off post Jimmy Carter. And consequent to that, now, every time we get into a pickle, we print money as opposed to try to fix the problem. And that lies the problem. So, I mean, I think you have to open up, this country back to what it was, to thinkers, to builders, to the engineers of this country. I mean, we have the good fortune of this country is we have persons from all walks of this world. I mean, the amount of talent that we have in this country far supersedes any other country, just based upon the fact that we have persons that have different ideas and they come from different walks of life and experiences. And we can pull talent from around the world because of this country. And it's also a safety measure. I mean, people are going to drop bombs in the United States. This country doesn't look so safe when you begin to look as if we can't afford much any longer, and people aren't going to invest in this country any longer. It's not a safe place to hold money. So yes, I do think we need to. That should be at the forefront of any presidential campaign, not just a libertarian, but this whole debt GDP ratio needs to change. We need to increase the GDP. We need to increase the GDP per capita. Right? I mean, why is it that, and how is it that we can loan money across the world and sometimes forgive loans for countries that fare better than ourselves when it comes down to how much, debt GDP, the GDP to per capita ratio? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's not fair to the American public. I think that the tax code needs to change. I think we need to simplify rules and regulations. I think you need to decrease business taxation, bring businesses back. I think you need to bring, there's a lot of things that are thrown out. Oh, we need to, we can pawn this off to other countries to do for the United States. No, we need to bring manufacturing back to the United States. We need to bring so much back to this country. And the only reason it's not is because of rules and regulations that are just arbitrary. Well, I can't say arbitrarily, but that are created by politicians that may or may not be in the best interest of citizens, right? A lot of this is done by lobbying groups, et cetera. I think these special interest groups need to be abandoned, and it needs to be America, looking at the people. And this is not to be like an unlibertarian and say that we're going to make America solely first, and we're not going to help anyone in the rest of the world, and we're not going to free trade, et cetera. This is entirely in opposition to that statement. I think we can do both. I mean, I think we can make this easier for companies to bring back money. I think we can bring back jobs to the United States, while at the same time be a good steward when it comes to trade and participating, in world economy. So, I just think this is a plethora of bad decisions, and not to mention the fact that we have a Fed that prints money hand over fist, and a Congress that's fiscally irresponsible. And those things need to change, and they're either going to change. They're going to change willingly with persons who vote, or they're going to be something that's violent. I mean, those are the only two options you're going to have.
So, Charles, I believe the greatest threat to us as Americans is the size and the scope of the federal government. Well, in our particular case, the state government too.
Right.
So what if you become president of the United States, what would you do, or what would you attempt to do about that threat to us as Americans?
I think we need to have a debt GDP ratio. Okay, I think this needs to be something manageable, and it needs to be. I think we need to bring all the states together, because obviously Washington can't do it. It would be nice if you had some sort of balanced budget type amendment, but I think this needs to be a constitutional amendment that says this cannot exceed, unless there's some sort of crazy natural disaster or war, or something that would mandate that we have to increase this, because right now we're just spending hand over fist. And then we need to lower the taxes and bring companies back to this country, and we need to recoup a lot of the money that's actually placed elsewhere in this world. And then bring in it's not singularly going to be one thing. I think it has to be a plethora. You have to say, listen, we need to get a bunch of smart minds and fiscally responsible people together and say, how are we going to do this? And by the way, if Congress can't do it, we're going to do this through our states, because we have the right to do so. That's in our Constitution.
Well, it does seem like the most important thing is that somehow we dispel most people of the idea that wealth is created by larger government. I mean, it just seems like, because so much of the stuff that you're talking about, the idea of, I guess helping out other countries and all that. I mean, these are all things that we can do as individuals. It seems like, so much of this stuff, I think, people have this air that maybe it has to be government taking on that mission, and that's of course how government just sort of balloons into the stratosphere, as we're seeing some of those graphs.
We can't afford it. I mean, at some point, if you can't afford it for ourselves, I mean, if we can't afford it, we don't do it. Or, and sometimes if you do, you're going to have to figure out how to pay up in the end. This is not just a blank check, and that's kind of the way it seems right now. And that graph should make people scared. I mean, that is a steep slope. I mean, that is how for the life of me are we going to afford that in a few years? Right now, the budget is 7% of the U.S. budget gets paid for debt, and in a few years it's going to be 10%. While at the same time, our population is getting older. We're spending more and more for chronic disease processes because now we've chosen as a society to, for the most part, to governmentalize our healthcare, and so our expenditures are going to go up there too. While at the same time, we're not slowing down on military expenditure. So where's all this money going to come from?
Sorry. I just, since you did touch on the healthcare, that does bring up an interesting question. You being a doctor, I would think you might have some extra inside baseball knowledge on this, I guess. But what's your thoughts on how much we're spending on healthcare and maybe ways we should be addressing that?
So, I think there are many. I know there are many ways to go about trying to rehabilitate this process, right? So we have placed a government system. We have a government system that has pretty much monopolized the price fixture, right? So this is a price fix situation. The way it works is government, gives a certain code. It's now they call it an RVU code, and persons, figure out exactly what it is that a particular procedure, your time is worth in certain situations, and that's how you're compensated. Hospitals are compensated, physicians are compensated. There are different levels of RVUs or worked RVUs versus hospital RVUs, et cetera. And so this number is not something that is, it can be negotiated, but not to the same degree that you'd think, right? So consequent to that, you have a price fix situation, and it's always around, the cost to a consumer is going to be somewhere around that price point. Now, generally, insurance companies pay a little bit more than, say, a standard RVU from CMS or Medicare. So consequently, people fight for insurer dollars, et cetera, knowing full well that Medicare pays at about cost and Medicaid pays below and insurers. So they try to recoup the cost on that. So I think what you have to do is make it transparent. I think you need to let companies be able to I really think that insurers, so I see the government as a referee, not as an owner, not as a part owner, not as a person that truly makes decisions. I think they simply are the referee in a football game and say, you kind of did wrong. We have some guidelines so that people don't get hurt, and that's where we stand on this, because they're going to be more nimble, and there's a lot of laws that they're not going to have to follow, say, a federal government to cut costs, right? And so I think you need to open that up to more insurers where you can actually work across state lines. If you could work with states to allow that, larger patient pools. I think you have to take physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, PAs, ultrasound techs, just go through the whole gamut of persons working in this industry, and what it is that they can do perhaps needs to be expanded, because you're not making that many more physicians given the aging population, and furthermore, much of the medical workforce are female. And look, and I am not some sort of misogynistic, bigot or whatever like that. And just the truth is that a lot of times ladies want to have families, and they're not like the guys where they're like, oh, I can work 36 hours and I'll show you how tough I am. So consequently, the labor force has actually shrunk because of that as well. Most of the time, the ladies are actually smarter than men, by the way. But the labor force is diminished as a consequence of this. I think there needs to be transparency. You need to stop price collusion. You say you don't have it, but I would argue that that's not true. There needs to be fair pricing in some way. I think there's some drugs that when they become so beneficial to society, there needs to be a means by which, and they do have these means, but and I forget the actual name of the statutes or what have you, but that they become more accessible and less expensive, so that because it does the public good. There's just so many levels that need to be changed. And right now, for instance, the big push is on to use a single item for a patient, right? So if you were to come in and I'm an ENT and you have a sinus problem, I will use a scope. But this scope, that someone has figured out that now you will use a disposable scope, because ultimately by the time you were to process it and go through all of the means, to make sure this is clean, it's cheaper just to buy one for every patient, right? Plastic thing with chips and all this metal, all the intricacies that go into making a computerized digital chip camera, right? And now we're talking green, but it's not green because we're throwing this away for every individual that walks in the door that has this procedure. And you may do, 10, 20 of these things a day. There's so much waste that you see that it's incredible. It really is. And the thing about it, as a physician, you really feel in many cases that you have no say so in this matter, because, no one asks the docs or the nurse practitioners, or the litany of medical personnel exactly how can we make this more cost effective. It's just sort of mandated down by the big government, and this is what you're supposed to do. And if you don't act within these guidelines, then your hospital's not accredited, and thereafter you have financial problems. So I think there needs to be more participation from members too, that actually boots on the ground.
So Charles,
yes,
I've been listening to you, and in general, I kind of agree with what you're saying. I want to understand your point of view here. I think, and I'm just going to throw my bias out, if you want to call it that the only thing that's going to solve this problem that we have in medical care here in the United States, or healthcare here in the United States, is by opening up the industry to a lot more market forces. That's the only thing that's going to solve it. Okay, no amount of tinkering at the edges. Okay, so I'm trying to understand if this is where you want to lead us. That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yes, the answer to that is yes, but I will caution you. If you do not have guidelines in which insurance companies, medical product companies, etc., must act, it will be a disaster, because there is not a single day that goes by that I am not writing some letter to an insurance company on behalf of a patient arguing why he or she needs a certain therapy consequent to a poor decision, right? Because the insurer is trying to save bucks, and they don't know the patient from Adam. They're just basically having policy, and like a shirt, and the one size doesn't fit all. And sometimes you have to have means to clarify some of these situations so that the person that you're trying to care for actually gets a decent outcome. And so if you don't have these guidelines in place, and I'm not saying it needs to be government run, I just think there has to be a referee, an arbiter that can help solve some of these. There has to be some rules in place, because if you simply leave it to the market, people could get hurt.
Yeah, it does feel though like the current system is also hurting a lot of people. We have a lot of government in it too.
Yeah.
No, it is. It is. I mean, that's my thing. It's just not very nimble. I mean, call. I mean, I don't know how it is in where you guys are, but I mean, when I was in the Bay Area, I mean, most persons had a concierge doctor, because very few people worked for like the Kaisers and that. Most people, if they needed a doc, they would actually have their doctor that they paid X number of dollars a month or per annum, and they would go see him, because they're just out in that particular area there was just a lack of physicians that worked for, say, insurers. That's how it was back when I was there in 2006. So it's probably changed drastically since that time. But it was but things are changing, and it's not going to. I don't see it as a physician getting any better. I tell everyone, medicine's great. Technology's changed. The amount of drugs we have now are far superior to what we've had in the past. In many cases, you literally see miracles happen. I mean, a few years ago, if you had Hep C, I mean, there's a chance you're going to get hepatocellular cancer and die. Now there's magical drugs that you can eradicate it within 8 to 12 weeks, and problem solved. I mean, so you've really seen miracles happen over our lifetime. It's come with a cost. I mean, the cost being in the United States, that cost of drug will be $80,000 to $120,000 when I last checked into it. But the World Health Organization reports that you can actually make the therapy for about $500, full course. So so there has to be some means by which we can we can bring these costs down, right?
Maybe the issue is an intellectual property issue. Maybe if somehow we change some of the IP laws, maybe we might be able to have some of these things. But yeah, anyways, it sounds like it's a tough problem.
Right.
So, I did want to touch on a couple other topics, at least before we have to let you go. One of them, and Jane, maybe you can bring this up, homelessness. I mean, my gosh, here in California, it's certainly bad, and we've certainly had scandals. I would play the video, but I don't want to take the time. But Gavin Newsom, $20 billion audit of the system, and where did it all go? He literally promised us back 15 years ago. He told San Francisco he had a 10-year plan. And now we're 15, 20 years later, and he's lost pretty much all the money in homelessness. He's grown it out to the rest of the state.
Maybe this was his plan.
Yeah, maybe so. But what are your thoughts on that? If you were president, how would you deal with this issue?
I think it's horrible, but I think it's on many levels. I mean, you have persons that are in this situation from bad luck. You have persons that choose to do that, but most people don't choose to live that way. I mean, it's become expensive. I think there needs to be less rules and regulations as far as, where can builders build? How can they build? If you did that, maybe you can make housing that would be more affordable for some people. I'm not saying make it unsafe. I just think that perhaps there's a little bit too much government oversight in many of these situations. But the other thing is what happens to families? I mean, some of these families are living like this. I mean, I've watched the news and seen the reports and watched the videos and all that sort of stuff. But many of these people have fallen apart because the family structure in the United States is fallen to pieces. And so, I think there much needs to be done to try to unify families and to bring people back together so that you actually have a system that can help you. That's not big brother, i.e. federal government. That is, you have a brother, you have a sister, you have a mom, you have a dad, or you have some group, that can actually help you. So, I think that's not singularly, let's just sort of fix this by throwing money at it. I think that's going to show, and that sounds like that's and I hate to use this because it's disparaging, and that's not what I would try to do, but it sounds more like a democratic idea. Let's just throw money at it and see if it works. And that doesn't work for most things. I mean, you have to have a solid foundation, and I think that's family, and I think mental health, needs to be addressed, and perhaps you need to find affordable housing for individuals so it doesn't cost so much. I lived in the Bay Area, and I had to take out loans just to be a fellow out there, and it's painful. I mean, how people can afford to live in the San Francisco area is just, it's beyond me because us little poor people in South Louisiana, that's a huge burden on any family. So you're house poor before you even get started.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems like, they throw that money at it, and the problem always seems to get bigger, almost like there's an industrial complex that grows up to accommodate all those funds. But
the answer always is, let's throw a little more money at it.
More money at it.
Get it right this time.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. But on a very similar note is the immigration issue that we have currently going on. Certainly, this is kind of a tough one for a lot of libertarians because ideally, most libertarians would like there to be a relatively open border. But with I think Eric Adams really hit it on the head with this debate about, Milton Friedman had famously said that, look, you can kind of have open borders or you can have a welfare state, but you can't have both. He said something to that effect. Anyways, and Eric Adams literally said to city council that, hey, this issue will destroy New York City. And I've never heard a more, I guess, square taking on that issue from a Democrat than there, where they have given a lot of essentially social services to attract a lot of migrants. But here in a Pew Research article, here they're talking about this, we're seeing the highest numbers on record at the end of 2023. So how would you address this issue?
So, I think that, where I look at this is I think there is illegal immigration. And I get, some persons like Jacob, I don't know if you've had Jacob on, super duper guy, also running for president. He's an open borders guy. I'm not that guy. I've seen Marcus from Trinidad having to go through the process, do it, fairly. And it works, albeit it's very difficult. But I don't think, but the reason why persons are coming across is, and I'm mentioning this, the Mexican border, right, is because of the social services that one can get here that you can't get at home. Not to mention safety issues, but not everyone is simply looking for political asylum. They're just trying to find a better place to live, and they're trying to raise their families, etc. And kudos, to them for attempting this. But at the same time, shame on our government for providing, social services to the degree that what it's doing right now. If I think states need to look at this, and I'm a states' right guy. I mean, I've always been, and I think states. I think it would behoove the states to say, listen, we need to set out quotas, and so you can call out the sort of quote unquote sanctuary states and say, this how many people we're going to be able to accept on any given year, what we can afford to do, and that way they can put their money where their mouth is, so to speak. I think you should let these people work when they come in. You can't let someone be a burden on society. And by the way, you can't work until we can somehow, have judges process you, et cetera, of which there's not enough. So people have to, take off on their time to go down to the border to process persons coming across. So the whole system needs to be simplified. It's messed up right now. I think you need to start on many levels. The taxation, how can someone pay into a system so Americans don't feel as if they're getting the short end of the stick, and they don't see an immigrant as a bad person, because most of them are not bad people. The news likes to, just show you the persons that have committed some sort of crime, but many of these people are family people that are just simply want to better themselves or their children. And so I think there's a way to manage this, but it needs to start on a few levels. Taxation, let people work, quotas, easier processing, figuring out who's the bad guy, who's the not, and not let the bad persons in. This country was founded on immigration. We need immigrants. our population is declining, so to speak. I mean, we're getting an age population. We need worker bees in the society, not just for the menial jobs, but also for the tech jobs, et cetera. So, I think we have to embrace these, and it should not be this should not be a subject of contention. We should figure out how to make this work for everyone.
Well, that is, there's one other thing that a lot of libertarians might bring up too, and that's it. Aside from the fact that we have maybe potentially high benefits that might be drawing people in, but the fact that we have this drug war that is also potentially causing a lot of distortions in their,
right.
South of the border countries. Do you have any thoughts as well on maybe drug war policy or some of our?
I don't believe in the war on. I mean, the war on drugs has failed. And look, I'm a physician. I don't use drugs. I have no need to. But at the same time, I don't hold them in the degree of disdain that some people do. I think many of these are misperceptions. Perhaps they had bad experience, or they've had a loved one pass away as a consequence of that. I don't think there should be Schedule I drugs. I don't. I don't think I think the government should leave much of this to the states. And the reason why is because if you want to be in a community and live in a state where they do mix religion, or they do mix some sort of policy with drug, with drug culture, they may not like it, and that's their prerogative. But if you live in another state or another society where they may see that this is completely open and free, God bless them. But I agree wholeheartedly with you. I mean, this has created a massive border crisis. This has created a lot of, just persons that are getting bad drugs across. People, if they buy it off the streets, can't walk into the drugstore and figure out what's in their pills, or, they'll be arrested perhaps if they were to show this to somebody. It's become an unsafe situation. There's not enough treatment centers. There's not, there's just so many ways that we can rectify this, because the war on drugs has failed. It doesn't work. It won't work. I mean, in the city of New Orleans, it's just as like in Sacramento, you probably walk down the street and find whatever the heck you want if you just ask the right person. I mean, so it's not working. I mean, and so so if it's not working, how can we go about to better the situation? And there are a number of examples from around the world. So if someone says, "Oh, that can't work," that's not entirely true. I mean, just look at what other countries have done to try to improve the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. We don't have gangs of people coming across the border with alcohol.
Exactly.
So yes, once we got rid of prohibition on alcohol, so you would think that we would have taken a lesson from that.
Right. Right. I mean, look, same thing happened, right? So prohibition, and now everybody's drinking methanol and going blind, right? So I mean, or many people. I mean, look at the number of people that got hurt consequent to these poor decisions. And so this is it. There's no difference, just a different substance,
Well, we're getting close to the end of the show, and because there's so many topics I would have liked to have asked you about. Is there any particular one that you wanted to give us, your thoughts on, that you're just passionate about? Because I feel like I'm not giving you near enough time to talk about all your stuff. I'm passionate about a lot of things. I mean, healthcare is obviously my bailiwick because I do this every single day. But I think the biggest threat to this country is its debt right now. And that and the fact that I think the whole idea of us becoming a socialist country is out of control right now. And I think there's too many hardworking Americans that really feel like they're just not being heard right now. They feel like they're being taxed without representation. They don't see any goods and services, or not the goods and services they would expect. There's not anybody that you can really talk to about this. I think this country, we need to figure out how to make this work for everyone. We were kind of made fun of when we were up in Salt Lake City by one of the newspapers. I told a reporter we need to be the adults in the room, and some of the ideas were sort of made fun of legalization of drugs, whatever it was that what they wrote. But I truly believe that this party is more of the adult party. If you listen to our policies, I think this country needs to go back to the Bill of Rights. And justice needs to be equal for everyone and blind. And we've become a society where it's not. And that's something that we should be ashamed of. And I think this party holds promise in trying to bring us back to what this country was how it was developed and its ideals from its inception. And so hopefully we can get back there. And hopefully this party does very, very well this November.
Indeed.
Well, I
Indeed.
certainly hope so too. Well,
Yeah.
we're about next to the end of the show, and I did want to try and bring us our Knucklehead Noise Patrol real quick, just to give us something outrageous to talk about real quick. Something that happened in the news not too long ago, and it was with yet another presidential contender, not in the Libertarian Party, although I feel like he's not that far off. But Vivek Ramaswamy, and James, maybe you could bring up the visual here. He was interviewing Ann Coulter, and he was talking a lot about immigration policy in his presidential run, but he did ask her a question about essentially him running for office and what she thought of him. And here was her answer, and I just totally oh my gosh. Let's watch the video.
I saw
here.
that.
And that was
James,
a great. And that was a great opening segment. Lots of things to talk about there. Oh, and I agreed with many, many things you said during, in fact, probably more than most other candidates when you were running for president. But I still would not have voted for you because you're an Indian. We'll get back to that.
So Ann Coulter is like, she's one of the biggest proponents of sort of a tight immigration system. And that was, one of the things she thought she was getting with Donald Trump. And then she eventually turned on him when she didn't think he was doing enough on it. But I mean, oh my gosh, what a terrible thing to say. I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
In this day and age, that's incredibly closed-minded, and I don't agree with it. I don't, not at all.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't call it closed-minded. Okay, I'll call it stupid and racist. Okay.
Yeah.
Because this have nothing to do.
Isn't that closed-minded?
I'm trying to be politically correct.
Well, I am not. I am not. Okay. I rant a lot on this show. Okay. And this have nothing to do with immigration. Vivek Ramaswamy was born in Ohio, if I'm not mistaken. He's an American citizen. So what the hell does immigration have to do with this? If she have an issue with immigrants crossing the border, I have a problem with illegal immigration. Though I'm an immigrant, but I came here legally. I have a problem with that. But for Ann Coulter to make this kind of nonsense, she's just making us look bad. She's just making us into the stereotype that everyone think about people on the right. They are a bunch of racists, they're a bunch of yahoos, and if they're black like me, they're a bunch of sellouts. That's all. That's what she's making us into.
Right.
Well, hopefully, as libertarians, we're setting ourselves apart from that. I hope. But Tim, do you have any thoughts?
Well,
okay. No,
Tim, you can go. Tim, you can go. Go ahead.
I agree. She's very close-minded, and she's putting her foot in her mouth. Didn't think her mouth was that big, but I guess it is. And of course, Dr. Ballay would know because he's an expert in that part of the body.
I think the mouth was big enough that Vermin Supreme's boot could have gone in there. Right?
Yeah. Well, I guess let me bring up your webpage again real quick so people can see that again. James, can you bring it up? It's Ballay2024.com. So you can go there and you can see what his stances are on all of the issues. Let's see, I had that up before. So you can actually get a little more detailed view of what he thinks on a lot of these big issues. Charles, did you have any last thoughts that you wanted to share with the audience before we go?
And in there, there's also understatements. And so I try when certain subjects come up to just write what comes to mind and put it online, because some people have written and asked questions about, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So I've tried to clarify some of these stances just so that it makes a little bit more sense to people who I am and what I sort of believe in and that sort of stuff. So I can't thank you guys enough. You're super, super nice people, and it's been a fantastic podcast with you guys.
Well,
thank you for being here, Charles, and we wish you all the best on the campaign.
Thank you very much, you guys.
Yeah, thank you. We've had a number of libertarian candidates that were very impressive, and you're right at the top. And
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well,
thank
and
you.
I'd like to say too that with the theme of the show, hopefully you're showing that one person can make a difference, and so you know, we're certainly looking forward to seeing what happens at the convention. And as far as for our audience, you can check this show out or many of our other shows out online, where we've interviewed a lot of people who are fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And before the next one, try and think about what you can do. I mean, here we're interviewing a guy who has literally decided to run for president, just because he just got the bug for it. And I mean, why, and we interviewed some people last week who are, going and they're petitioning their city councils for different things. And so there's all kinds of ways you can be active in your community. So just try and think of a way that you can join the fight as well. So thanks so much for joining us again. And until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Oh, yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.